In today's video, I'm going to go over the 10 biggest mistakes that I made as a beginner when it came to vibe coding my first SaaS app. Just to give you a quick little bit of background, the app that I developed is called Streamliner.gg, a website where live streamers can go to it, punch in a little bit of information about what they're going to be doing on their stream. Like, for example, maybe they're going to be playing some Elden Ring. They can punch in the game that they're playing. They could give it a little bit of information about themselves, maybe the vibe that they're looking for, and then the AI would generate ideas for them on what to do in that stream. They could then regenerate until they find an idea that they like, and once they choose an idea, it then basically builds an entire content package around that idea for the user. Everything from the title, to the descriptions, to chat commands that are, specialized towards that game or theme of their live stream. Would basically put together the entire, we'll call it a media kit for their live stream based off of the idea that it helped them come up with. And so it was a real simple application that I thought of, and it was something I thought I could use myself. And so I thought it would be fun to try it as my first vibe coding project. I very quickly realized that vibe coding, while totally awesome and works great a lot of times, also comes with its own unique set of challenges that just learning to program and programming it yourself would have. And so again, in this video, I want to go over 10 mistakes that I made that hopefully I can help you avoid to make your vibe coding journey a little bit, or at least start off on a little bit better footing early on than mine did. With that said, let's go ahead and jump into number one. And so the first mistake I made was having a weak MVP and weak prompts. You see, I went in and I just told the AI, hey, I want to make this application where the AI generates everything for the user, blah, 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 build it for me. And I expected the AI to then just sit there and come up with this entire huge program. And somehow in my brain, I think I expected that somehow it was going to magically develop the perfect app for me that I was absolutely going to love. Obviously, if you've done any kind of vibe coding at all, that's not the case whatsoever. In fact, I very quickly realized how important it was to first have a conversation before you start any kind of programming project with the AI to really flesh out, what do you want the app to do? What do you want it to look like? What tech stack do you want to use? What are some of the ideas you have? And kind of go back and forth and build this project scope and build this MVP with the AI so that you know exactly what it is that you're trying to accomplish, and you know exactly all of the features you want to have, what you want to make sure it doesn't have, etc., etc. And then on top of that, I would give it a prompt like, hey, I developed this project scope. Now here it is. And I would tag it in the chat and I would say, now go build it. And I wouldn't really give the AI any instruction. I wouldn't say, hey, let's build this first. Let's get the framework set up. Let's get the basics set up. Let's get the back end set up, and then check each of those things as I was going, still kind of relying on it to just know what to do entirely on its own without any input from me. And so I realized not only do I need to have that well-defined MVP and project scope files at the beginning and README files and stuff like that, but I also needed to make sure I held the hand of the AI and walked through it with it, not just because the AI couldn't do things, but also so that I would learn along the way on what I needed to do to make sure that the app continued to function as I continued adding more and more features into the application. And so that takes me into my second mistake, which was trying to reinvent the wheel. Once you have the idea down, once you know what it is you want to do, once you know what it is you want your app to have, the features you want it to have, the stack that you're going to use, etc., etc., the next thing you want to do is try to use code that already exists. And we call these libraries in programming, or they're called. I didn't know that too much in the beginning either. But what I'm hoping to say from you with this mistake is that there are things called libraries. And what libraries are their code that people already wrote and put into this package that you can just use their code that is already proven to work within your own application. For example, if you want to make a call to OpenAI, to ChatGPT model from OpenAI to do AI generation, there's already a library out there that does the call and everything and is programmed to do the call. And all you have to do is plug in your API key into your code, into your env file, and just send it off, and it'll use this library that already exists to do the work. You don't have to sit there and actually have the AI program out its own, call to OpenAI's API and stuff like that. And there's different libraries for everything. If you want to do authentication for users, having signups and things like that, there's a library that already exists. If you want to integrate payment methods like Stripe or PayPal into your application, there's libraries that already exist and the code's all there already, and you just need to implement the library into your project, and then you can call that library whenever you need to. The third mistake that I made was that there was no version control early on. I didn't know what GitHub was. I didn't understand what creating a commit was, and you might not either. And what it is basically GitHub is a website where you can upload your code to it, and every time you make a change, you can have your AI coding agent, in my case, Cursor or Claude code, you can have it push the changes to GitHub, and it creates a new version automatically for you. And you can have hundreds of what they call commits. And over time, every time you make a little change, you make a new commit. If something ever breaks, it's very easy to roll back to that previous commit. You know, if you run into a bug that you can't get the AI to fix, or you can't figure it out with the help of AI, you can just roll back to that previous version and try again. And early on, I was not doing that. I was just having the AI write the code. You know, it would run it locally, run a local server. I would test it out. I'm like, okay, it works. Let's do the next thing. It would get broken, and I'd have to sit there for hours going back and forth with the AI, trying to figure out what broke on something super small, some little small feature that we did, whereas I could have just rolled it back, had the AI try again. And what I've come to realize is a lot of times, the second or third time the AI tries to do it, it gets it right. And I don't have to sit there and try to figure out these weird little bugs that the AI introduced. So not understanding what GitHub is, not understanding how to create commits and push commits to GitHub so that I had that version control. So think of it as like Windows restore points, where you can create these restore points after you make some changes on your system, or before you're gonna make changes on your system, and then you go and make the changes, and if something breaks, you can just restore back to that previous point. Let's say you get 5 or 6 commits sent to GitHub before you realize there's a mistake that got introduced. You roll back to the previous version, the mistake's still there, you just didn't realize it from previously. You can roll back again, and you can go back to any of those commits that you want to and bring your code right back to that version immediately at any time. It's a really cool system, and definitely something that you're gonna wanna learn and start using right off the bat. And speaking of GitHub, the fourth thing would be not submitting enough commits. And what we call that is having huge diffs. So diffs, D-I-F-F-S, are differences between your code. So having huge diffs in files between each commit. And so what that means in reality is you develop this, outline, you get the basic part of your app done, then you decide you're gonna add this new feature and you add it on. Like for example, let's say maybe you add on simple user authentication where people can sign up with a username and a password, and then they can log in with said username and password. Then maybe you add on the first part of the generation, or maybe you change part of the generation. Then maybe you change some things with the payment processor part of it and how people sign up for the service. And, I'm just coming up with stuff off the top of my head right now, but basically you make all these little changes, and instead of creating a new commit after each small change, you wait until you've done 5 or 6 of these and then you create the commit. And then the problem is, let's say that there's a little error and you can't figure it out. Now you have to go all the way back when maybe the first 4 or 5 things you added, they worked perfectly fine in local development when you ran it on your own system in like a local server that was spun up. It all worked perfectly fine. And now you got an error, you can't figure it out. So you got to roll back like we said you could do, which is awesome that you can do so, but now you lost all of that progress. So basically, not creating enough commits or waiting too long. It's very quick and simple to create a commit. It literally takes a couple seconds to do once you kind of learn the commands and have the commands memorized. And a lot of times you can have AI even do it, but honestly, it's just quicker to just throw the commands in yourself really quick. The other thing is inside Git, you actually have your main branch, it's called, which is all of those versions that you produce, but you can actually spin off branches off of that main branch. So let's say you're adding on a new feature, you can actually create a new branch, do all of the stuff that you need to do, and then you can pull that branch back into the main code once you're sure everything's working and once you're sure the whole new feature is completely added and it doesn't clutter up your main branch with all these little tiny commits. So not understanding how often to commit and not using branches to their fullest advantage was definitely something that I realized very quickly was causing negative ramifications when it was me trying to do my vibe coding. And so again, that kind of goes with the third one, which is learn Git and learn it well, because it will save you a lot of fucking headaches. The next mistake I made was not keeping my docs and README files up to date, including the original MVP or project scope files that we talked about in the first part. So not only do you want to create these things and be detailed with them and put in there what you want and have them really fleshed out and not so vague, you also want to make sure that as you're going through your editing phase, your vibe coding phase with your AI programmer, that you're keeping these documents up to date. Maybe you decide you no longer want a feature in your MVP. Maybe you decide you want to add some new features. Maybe you decide to change something in your tech stack. You need to update these files. The AI can only go off the information it is given. And so if you're giving it outdated information and it randomly pulls up some of those files, it's very quickly going to start mixing things up and mismatching things. And an example of this would be when I first started, I was pushing all of my website to Heroku, which is a a hosting platform for SaaS apps. And I was pushing everything to Heroku. Well, later I changed and got my own VPS through DigitalOcean, and I installed Coolify, and I was basically running my own kind of server. When I did that, there were still lots of bits and pieces of Heroku in, and so it kept mixing up, pushing to Heroku versus creating my Docker file and pushing to Coolify. And now you might not understand what all these terms mean, and that's not the important part of this, but what I'm saying is just make sure that you keep those documents and stuff up to date so that the AI knows what it's supposed to do, what features you should have, what features you shouldn't have, what tech stack you should be using, what tech stack parts you shouldn't be using anymore, etc., etc. The next mistake that I made that I think is a huge beginner mistake is I did not use logging to my advantage. Logging is simply adding code within your code that tells you when the code hits problems or when certain things happen. So for example, maybe you have a series of events happening in your code, like for example, a generation is happening for content ideas, then for titles, then for descriptions. And so you can have logging after each of those events in your code to maybe log whether it was successful after that part or if it failed at that part. And it really helps you narrow down where bugs are within your code by telling you where the code's actually failing. And there's lots of different ways to do this. You can have logging show up inside your actual browser using the browser tools that are built in for developers into every browser. You can actually have it print out locally to your command prompt or PowerShell or whatever, console window that you're using. If you're on Mac or something, or Linux, you can actually have it print out logging messages right there in your console. And you can even have it save files on your system, text files and stuff that have logging information in them of various things that are happening within your code. And so not learning how to use logging, how to implement logging within your program and having AI regularly implementing logging, especially while you're testing out new features or new sections of your code, is a huge mistake that I made and something that will save you a lot of time if you learn how to do it early on. The seventh mistake that I made when vibe coding my first SaaS app was using only one agent at a time. You see, I would open up Cursor, I would select whatever agent I wanted to use, and meaning whatever model. So whether that was Gemini, Claude, ChatGPT, and then I would talk with that agent and I would build my site. What I quickly realized helped a lot in causing a lot of issues to never even pop up to begin with was basically opening up a second agent that would act as kind of a senior developer and would kind of oversee the project and the coding that the AI agent that was doing the coding was doing. That was a horrible way of saying that, but you get what I'm saying. It would be the one that I would talk to, come up with the ideas, figure out what I want, and then it would make the prompt to give to the AI coding agent, in this case, Cursor or Claude Code, depending on which one I was using. And it would then tell it, and then once that AI coding agent made its changes, wrote its code, etc., I would paste that back into the senior developer who would go over everything to make sure there was no mistake. And the best way of doing this is to actually use two different large language models, because one mistake that one large language model might make doesn't necessarily mean another large language model would make that same mistake. And so a lot of times, just by using that extra language model in there and having two of them instead of one, it would catch a lot of issues between the two agents. They would basically catch their own mistakes and help each other code something way better right off the start or right off the rift, which means I didn't have to do as much debugging or figuring out errors in the code. The eighth mistake I made was being too afraid to completely scrap code or a feature and rewrite it from scratch, or have the AI rewrite it from scratch. We're vibe coding here. You know, when I started doing this, I thought code is so complicated. It seems so complicated, but with libraries and everything that exists nowadays, as you start getting into it, you realize you can do a lot of stuff with a very small amount of lines of code. And you can call from a lot of different libraries that'll handle things for you and stuff like that. And you don't need as much as you think you do. And so a lot of times when you run into a bug or an issue that you just can't figure out and you can't get the AI to figure it out, sometimes just completely scrapping that file and having the AI rewrite it from scratch, or heck, even just completely scrapping the entire project, as crazy as that may seem, could be the best thing for you to do. For example, I got to a point where I ended up restarting from scratch Streamliner.gg twice, completely deleted it 2 times. And it wasn't until my 3rd attempt at doing it that I actually walked away with a product that I liked and was proud of and functioned correctly, the way that I wanted it to do it, exactly the way that I wanted to do it, versus trying to compromise or figuring out little workarounds for bugs and things like that that I was facing from the first writes. And so the the unwritten rule of thumb that I came up with was, if me and the AI that I'm working with fails 3 times, or I'm spending more than an hour chasing a tiny bug, then I just delete that part of the code and have the AI redo it from scratch. And maybe I'll change the model. Maybe I'll have a different model try to, a lot of times, honestly, I just have the same exact model write the code again, and it does perfectly fine the 2nd or 3rd time I have it try to do it. The 9th mistake that I made as a beginner was trying to overcomplicate stuff too soon. When you're starting, program the basics. I think what makes somebody a successful programmer in general, or a successful coder in general, whether you're actually writing the code or whether you're using AI to write it, is learning how to think logically and in steps, and to break down these big complicated tasks into very small, manageable bits and pieces that you can then build upon as you kind of have that foundation laid. For example, you know, when I first started, I would try to do all these different methods for authentication. And then it was basically like, hey, just use a simple, easy authentication library. It might not do everything you want it to do, but you start there. You get things built. Once you build it, you can go back and swap out pieces and change the authentication that you're using or whatever. But I've found that keeping it very simple early on and just kind of getting it built and working will save you so much headaches, because a lot of times you'll come to find out that some other part of the code that you end up doing, or some other piece of it, will solve the problem that you thought you were going to have anyways, with being limited by a certain library or whatever. Or you'll just find out there's another library that'll do the other thing itself. So again, don't overcomplicate things too soon. Try to keep things as simple as possible. Ship simple, add fancy later. Get it working, get it launched, get it out there, and then refine it as you go. People don't mind watching something be built. I mean, look at the gaming space, for crying out loud. Everything's early access now. They release it to start making money because they have the idea, and then they build on it, they iterate on it, and they make it better over time. And if you keep it simple and you ship something, 2 things will happen. Number 1, you'll learn quicker because the code will be easier for you to follow along. And number 2, you'll actually ship something which will feel good, and it'll give you that motivation to keep going and to keep learning. So remember your skill level, keep things as simple as possible so that you understand what's going on, you're learning as you're going, and then add later to it. Make it better later. Add the flair later, whatever the case may be, but keep it simple early on. And then the 10th mistake I made was auto deploying my main GitHub branch to production. This is one of the biggest mistakes that I made, which was I had set up so that Heroku would automatically, whenever a new commit was pushed to GitHub, it would automatically update on my production. And this was how I was testing stuff. I would code something, I would push it to production, I would go on the site and test it. If it didn't work, I would roll it back a commit, and then I would try again. And I was doing all of this up until recently. This is one of the dumbest mistakes that I've done, and was still doing until just recently. But I basically just kept pushing everything to production instead of creating a separate, container or whatever on my server that would just have, a testing ground or whatever instead of just a production ground. And so I was constantly just pushing the stuff right to production. Now, yeah, I would test locally, and I thought that was enough. I thought, oh, I ran it on my computer, everything's working, let me push it to production. You very quickly realize just because something's working locally does not mean when you push it to an actual web server out there that it's still going to be working. And so this was a huge issue for me because I actually ended up breaking my site so bad that I couldn't get it to go back and start working again for some reason. I don't know enough yet to really understand even what I did, but somehow I must have broken something on the actual server in terms of like databases or something, that even though I had reverted my code back, things still weren't talking, communicating, etc. And it completely took my production site offline for a week and a half while I tried to figure out what the hell was going on and to fix it. Don't make that mistake. Create a separate environment for testing before you push to production, even if you're testing locally. And again, if you do have it set up to where your main branch auto deploys, make sure you're using branches within GitHub to add the features. And once you know something's good and it's working and you've run it through testing, then you can push it to your main branch, knowing that it's going to get auto deployed, which is awesome. You don't have to do anything. It just auto gets deployed, but you know the code then at that point is working because you've tested it over here in your testing environment. All right, guys. And with that, that's the 10 mistakes that I think were the biggest mistakes I made when starting off vibe coding my first project. If you've not checked out my website, you should definitely check it out, streamliner.gg, just to see the first thing that I ever vibe coded and built. I'm pretty proud of it. I had made some little scripts here and there using vibe coding, just to do some simple things in Python to make automate some tasks. But this was the first full project that I made and released, and I'm super proud of it. I'll probably still break it a lot. Heck, by the time you guys watch this video, who knows, it might be broken again. I seem to always make these boneheaded mistakes when it comes to it, but I'm learning, I'm having fun. And I think if you take these 10 things that I said, learn them, figure them out before you start vibe coding, understand how these different things work and use them, take my mistakes and learn from them, and then do the right thing to start with, it will make the journey 1,000 times easier, I promise. All right, guys, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this, you guys should definitely check out this video I did. I think you guys will really enjoy it as well. I think it turned out amazing. It's one of my favorite videos we've done. And don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more AI content. That's what we do around here. Just a guy that's learning AI and sharing what I learn as I do it. I love your faces. Thank you for the love and support back. I appreciate it. And until next time, peace out, everybody. Later, nerds.